On an October evening in AD 54, Rome held its breath, anticipating change. The imperial palace, usually bustling with noise and intrigue, had fallen into an unusual silence after a modest banquet. Claudius, the life-seasoned 64-year-old emperor, retired to his chambers, content after savoring his favorite dish, mushrooms expertly prepared in a piquant sauce. None present could have imagined that this culinary delight would prove fatal for the ruler, opening the gates to one of the most sinister periods in the history of the great empire. That night, Rome's fate was decided not by the gods, but by the cold, calculating ambition of one woman, Julia Agrippina the Younger. The poisoning of Claudius is a widely known fact, but the true darkness erupted later, following his demise. Agrippina didn't merely dispose of her husband, she went much further in her lust for power. Most terrifying was what she did to retain the reins of power. She deftly manipulated her son, Nero, transforming him into a pliant instrument of her will, stripping him of his own individuality. This story is not merely a chronicle of palace intrigues and political games. It is a narrative about a woman born into the heart of the imperial family, who learned a harsh lesson from a young age. In Rome, only those who strike first survive. A woman who managed to transform personal tragedy into insatiable ambition, seduction into a deadly weapon, and politics into a ruthless game where lives were at stake. Historians such as Tacitus, Suetonius, and Dio Cassius describe her actions with trepidation and horror, yet also with a degree of admiration. They all concur, no Roman woman before her had reached such heights of power, and none had fallen so low into the abyss of disgrace. Disgrace. It is here that the narrative begins of a power-hungry empress whose excessive ambitions turned into deadly poison, and whose lust for power became her sole religion. Thus began the thorny life path of Agrippina the Younger, a woman who, like a serpent, poisoned eternal Rome with her cunning. Born on 6th of November, AD 15th in Germany, she came from a family destined for both greatness and profound misfortune. Her father Germanicus, a celebrated general who commanded the legions boundless respect and was seen as a direct heir to imperial power, drew the suspicions of Emperor Tiberius with his brilliance. When young Agrippina was barely 4 years old, Germanicus died under mysterious circumstances during a military campaign in the east. Many whispered that he had been poisoned on the orders of a jealous Tiberius. But the tragic events did not end there. Agrippina's mother, Agrippina the Elder, granddaughter of Augustus himself, openly defied Tiberius, demanding a fair investigation into her husband's death. This audacious attempt to seek justice cost her dearly. She was arrested and sent into exile, where she died a torturous death by starvation. The same fate befell two of her sons. Only Agrippina and her brother Gaius, who would become known by the ominous name Caligula, survived. During the harsh years of her childhood, Agrippina learned a cruel lesson about the nature of Roman power. Family could either be a reliable shield protecting against adversity or a death sentence, dooming one to destruction. At the age of 13, Agrippina was married off to Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus, a man of advanced years known for his harsh temperament. This union was not driven by affection. It was a political maneuver, common in aristocratic circles. Within this marriage, young Agrippina faced domestic violence and humiliation, yet she realized that even the most tormenting union could serve as a springboard for achieving her goals. From this marriage, a son was born, Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, who would go down in history as Nero. For Agrippina, this child was not just an heir, he was the key to boundless power. From his birth, she saw him as her primary political project. In AD 37, fate took an unexpected turn. Agrippina's brother Caligula became emperor. Suddenly, she found herself at the epicenter of Roman political life. Caligula was an unpredictable figure. He could show affection one moment, and the next, order and execution. His morbid attachment to his sisters, including Agrippina, shocked Roman society. For Agrippina, this became a period of harsh lessons. She had to weigh every word, analyze every gesture, and use her charm as a weapon to survive in this perilous world. Agrippina, a woman whose life was filled with trials, managed to survive in the brutal world of Roman politics. Her proximity to Caligula, while opening the palace doors and granting privileges, also created numerous adversaries. Soon, she was accused of conspiracy, leading to her exile. It was there, away from luxury and intrigue, that she forged her life philosophy, based on the principle, power is not granted, it must be seized by force. And to maintain this power, in her view, all means were acceptable. After Caligula's tragic death, the imperial throne passed to his uncle, Claudius. Agrippina returned to Rome, determined never again to be a pawn in someone else's game. She remembered how her mother had perished in exile, how she had endured a cruel marriage and suffered the tyranny of her mad brother. Now she was ready to transform all that pain and resentment into insatiable ambition. Agrippina, more than anyone, understood the laws of Roman power. She realized that Rome rewarded not virtue and honesty, but cunning and the ability to manipulate. She knew that men in power could be subjugated using three invisible yet potent tools: fear, seduction, and manipulation. And she intended to use all three to perfection. Having survived family tragedies, a brutal husband, and a tyrannical brother, Agrippina, with her son, whom she viewed as her primary political asset, was ready to make a triumphant return to the center of power. However, to conquer Rome and establish herself, she first had to neutralize the empire's most dangerous woman, Messalina, Emperor Claudius's wife. Upon Agrippina's triumphant return to Rome, she was confronted by the formidable figure of Valeria Messalina, Emperor Claudius's wife. Young, dazzlingly beautiful, and wielding immense power, Messalina had earned a notorious reputation for her cruelty and unrestrained debauchery. She ruled with an iron fist, instilling fear among her subjects, ruthlessly eliminating anyone who threatened her position, and transforming the imperial palace into a den of luxury and excess. Many trembled before her, yet at the same time, an army of enemies grew and multiplied, ready to exploit her slightest misstep. And this fatal error was not long in coming, occurring in AD 48. In Claudius's absence from Rome, Messalina committed an act beyond all comprehension. She publicly married a young senator named Gaius Silius, an act widely interpreted as a brazen attempt to overthrow the reigning power and seize control through a coup d'etat. News of this scandalous event exploded across Rome like a bombshell. The emperor, deeply offended by his wife's betrayal, could not contain his fury. He immediately ordered the execution of Messalina and Silius. The empress's throne became vacant, and Agrippina realized that the resulting void offered her a unique opportunity that could change her entire life. Claudius was a rather extraordinary individual. At first glance, he appeared weak, stammering, limping, and timid. By a twist of fate, he found himself on the throne almost by accident, after Caligula's tragic death. However, beneath this deceptive exterior lay the sharp mind of a scholar and a talented politician, far more astute and cunning than many might have assumed. Agrippina understood that she wouldn't win his heart using the same methods Messalina had: ostentatious luxury and scandalous behavior. Her strategy had to be different. She needed to present herself as the ideal alternative, an embodiment of virtue and wisdom. Agrippina, a woman shrouded in an aura of mystery and ambition, presented herself to the public as the embodiment of modesty and elegance. Her meticulously chosen attire and measured gestures created the image of a devoted mother, a respected widow, and a woman endowed with rare prudence. In private conversations, she skillfully charmed Claudius, demonstrating a sharp intellect and keen insight. Their discussions ranged from family lore and political intrigues to the very destiny of Rome. Agrippina gave him what he desperately needed: respect and genuine admiration, or at least a convincing illusion of them. Acting shrewdly and without haste, Agrippina gradually transformed from an advisor into the emperor's confidant. Their closeness grew, developing into something more intimate. In this carefully planned game, her son, Nero, played a pivotal role. Agrippina presented him to Claudius as a promising and charismatic youth, the ideal heir to the empire. She seduced Claudius not only as a woman, but also as a mother, offering him a future he couldn't afford to miss. However, a serious obstacle arose on the path to her ambitious goals. Agrippina was Claudius's niece by blood, and marriage between an uncle and niece was strictly forbidden by Roman law and considered incestuous. But Agrippina, who recognized no boundaries, leveraged all her influence in the Senate. Through generous bribes, favors, and pressure on senators, she succeeded in changing the law. In AD 49, a lavish imperial wedding took place. Rome gained a new empress, but with her came a sinister reality: a woman who had no desire to remain in the emperor's shadow, but instead aimed to become the true power behind the throne. Energetic and determined, Agrippina wasted no time. Unlike her predecessors, her ambitions extended far beyond the emperor's bedchamber. She participated in council meetings, sitting beside Claudius, and shone at official events, appearing in his company. Her image was struck on imperial coins, creating the impression of her co-rule. Rome had never witnessed such a sight: a woman openly sharing the burden of power. However, the crucial issue remained the succession to the throne. Claudius had a legitimate son, Britannicus, born from his marriage to Messalina. Agrippina understood that Britannicus's existence posed a serious threat to her plans. Therefore, she persuaded Claudius to adopt her son, Nero, who was then named Nero Claudius Caesar Drusus Germanicus. This move, reinforced by Nero's marriage to Octavia, Claudius's daughter, was intended to secure her son's status as the legitimate heir, sidelining Britannicus. Meanwhile, any potential opponents capable of challenging this succession disappeared one by one. They were eliminated through false accusations, exiles, and secret executions. One of the most notable examples was the fate of Domitia Lepida, Nero's aunt, who was accused of sorcery and executed. In just a few swift years, Agrippina had achieved a dizzying ascent from disgraced exile to the all-powerful ruler of the empire. Senators trembled before her, fawning courtiers extolled her, and Emperor Claudius increasingly fell under her sway. However, Agrippina's triumph harbored a deadly danger. Claudius began to realize how much he had lost control of the reins of power. And in the gloomy corridors of the palace, ominous whispers began foreshadowing her downfall, timid thoughts of restoring the throne to the legitimate heir, Britannicus. The empress, like a seasoned player, executed her game with impeccable precision. She had charmed Claudius, cleverly altered the law of succession, and secured the transfer of power to her son Nero. But in Rome, as is well known, power is never eternal. Claudius began to be plagued by doubts, and Agrippina perfectly understood that in court circles, doubts were like a poison, slowly but surely corrupting life. Agrippina's cunning plan seemed flawless. Nero had been proclaimed the official heir. Octavia, Claudius's daughter, had become his fiancée, and the unfortunate Britannicus had been pushed into the shadows. However, with time, the veil lifted from the emperor's eyes. With each passing month, Claudius grew more independent and began to voice his doubts within his inner circle. According to ancient chroniclers, he even uttered the fateful words, "May the gods forgive me, but perhaps I made a mistake in choosing the wrong heir. Britannicus is my flesh and blood, and it is he who is destined to rule." For Agrippina, these words sounded like a death sentence. If Claudius were to change his mind, she would not only lose limitless power, but would also become a victim of those she had ruthlessly eliminated on her path to the top. Driven by her lust for power, Agrippina turned to Locusta, a woman of Gallic origin whose name struck terror throughout Rome. This poisoner, who had honed her craft to perfection, knew how to take lives without leaving a trace. Together, they devised a cunning plan, choosing Amanita phalloides, or the death-cap mushroom, as their instrument of death. The poison from this mushroom was virtually indistinguishable from the symptoms of a natural illness, and death followed several agonizing hours later. The main challenge was to deceive the emperor's personal food taster. To achieve this, Agrippina employed a network of loyal slaves. The poison was added not to a random dish, but to Claudius's favorite delicacy, mushrooms prepared in an exquisite sauce. The calculation was simple. The emperor, who adored this dish, would undoubtedly ask for more. In October AD 54, Claudius hosted a modest banquet at his palace, inviting only his closest associates. The evening unfolded calmly. Wine flowed, strained jokes were made, and unhurried political discussions took place. The dish of mushrooms was served with particular ceremony. None of those present suspected that this platter carried the emperor's death. Claudius eagerly sampled the mushrooms, unaware of the sinister manipulations that had occurred between the kitchen and the dining table. Initially, nothing portended disaster, but an hour later, a true tragedy unfolded. The emperor was overcome by severe dizziness, excruciating abdominal pains, and relentless vomiting. The court physicians, in disarray, attempted to provide emergency aid, mistakenly believing the ailment was simply indigestion. Agrippina, meanwhile, like a seasoned actress, played her part flawlessly. She feigned concern, care, and anxiety, while deep down she eagerly awaited the climax of this sinister drama. Emperor Claudius's agony continued throughout the night, his body racked by convulsions, interspersed with periods of delirium and unconsciousness. At dawn on 13th of October, his consciousness finally left him. Agrippina, without losing a second, decisively took control of the situation. She personally sealed the imperial chambers, allowing entry only to the most trusted physicians and loyal slaves. Concurrently, she dispatched urgent messages to the most influential military commanders of the Roman Empire. Following Claudius's death, Rome was to recognize Nero as the new emperor without the slightest hesitation. By midday, the sorrowful news of the emperor's passing was officially announced, with the cause of death attributed to natural causes due to the ruler's advanced age. The court accepted this explanation without apparent objection, at least publicly. That same day, the 17-year-old Nero was solemnly proclaimed Emperor of Rome. Agrippina deftly presented him as the legitimate heir, convincingly asserting that this had been Claudius's dying wish. However, despite this carefully constructed narrative, all within the palace perfectly understood something far more sinister lay behind this seamless transfer of power. Rumors of poison, like a quiet but relentless whisper, began to spread through the palace, though no one dared openly discuss this terrible truth. Agrippina had accomplished what seemed impossible. In just a few short hours, she had managed to transform her husband's murder into her son's triumphant coronation. Rome had a new emperor, but the true power, like an invisible shadow, remained firmly in her grasp. The most influential woman in the Roman Empire had triumphantly achieved her desires. Claudius was eliminated, and Nero sat on the throne. However, managing the young ruler proved a far more complex task than disposing of an ailing emperor. Agrippina would soon realize that attempting to control an entire empire through her son was a game fraught with unpredictable and dangerous twists. Following Claudius's death, Rome jubilantly proclaimed Nero emperor, despite him being barely 17 years old. Formally, he was Caesar, but in effect, all key decisions were made by Agrippina. She invariably accompanied her son at public events, attended Senate meetings, and even received foreign ambassadors. Rome watched in astonishment as a woman occupied a position traditionally reserved exclusively for emperors. Her image began to be struck on imperial coins alongside her son's portrait, an unprecedented event. For a brief period, Agrippina effectively became the ruler of the empire. However, Nero was no ordinary youth. Possessing charisma, a love for the arts, and a sharp mind, he was also impulsive and insecure. From his earliest childhood, he had been shaped under his mother's close supervision to become a key figure in her grand scheme to seize power. Agrippina saw him not as a son, but merely as an extension of herself, a tool for achieving her own ambitions. She wrote his speeches, carefully selected his circle of acquaintances, and controlled his every decision. The young emperor lived as if in a gilded cage, where every action was predetermined by his mother's will. Initially, Nero, due to his inexperience, accepted his mother's dominant role as natural, seeing her as a wise mentor and guide through the labyrinths of power. However, a dangerous sense of resentment gradually grew within him, fueled by the feeling of being a puppet in someone else's game. Agrippina, seasoned in political intrigues, understood perfectly that power rested not only on formal titles and legal codes, but also on invisible chains of emotional dependence. Chroniclers of the era note that she deftly blurred the boundaries of their familial relationship, instilling in Nero the idea that only she could truly understand and love him. Agrippina cultivated a bond that transcended motherhood, resorting to physical intimacy and carefully calculated gestures to firmly hold her son in her power. Such tactics led to destructive consequences. Nero was torn between blind devotion and an increasingly intense hatred for his mother. The balance was finally shattered with the appearance of Poppaea Sabina, a woman of extraordinary beauty and immense ambition, who was Agrippina's equal in the art of manipulation. Poppaea skillfully found Nero's vulnerabilities and struck with precision. In intimate settings, she whispered words full of venom. "You are the emperor of great Rome, yet you behave like a child under your mother's yoke. Senators mock you behind your back, and soldiers doubt your strength and will. How long will you remain her prisoner?" These insidious speeches poisoned the young emperor's mind far more effectively than any concoction prepared by the cunning Locusta. Nero began to see his mother not as a reliable protector, but as a dangerous threat to his power and self-esteem. The relationship between Agrippina and Nero steadily deteriorated, with an air of impending doom. His mother, accustomed to holding the reins of power, tried to influence her son with reproaches, threats, and emotional pressure, but these methods proved ineffective. Nero became increasingly withdrawn and estranged. A cocktail of guilt and shame mingled in his soul with a growing resentment towards the woman who had placed him on the throne. Agrippina, possessing keen political acumen, recognized the impending danger. In a desperate attempt to retain power, she made a fatal miscalculation, threatening Nero with revealing to the public a secret they shared. With this step, she transformed from an ally into the primary threat to his reign. The Roman Empire had known many emperors who contended with external foes, be it wars, invasions, or rebellions. However, Nero was destined to embark on a far more personal and sinister struggle with his own mother, a conflict that would subsequently become one of history's most infamous matricides. The decision to murder his mother was not a spontaneous one for Nero. For several months, he pondered various methods of eliminating Agrippina without staining his hands with her blood. Ultimately, he devised a plan worthy of an ancient tragedian's pen, a staged shipwreck. Nero invited Agrippina to a conciliatory meeting at his villa, located in the picturesque Bay of Naples. This gesture appeared genuine, as if a son sought to mend a broken bond with his mother. Agrippina accepted the invitation, although years spent navigating the intrigues of the imperial court had taught her caution and mistrust. After her visit, Agrippina boarded a vessel prepared with malevolent intent. A treacherous mechanism had been set in motion. Part of the hull had been deliberately weakened to ensure an inevitable leak in the open sea. The design was for the ship to sink and the empire to mourn the untimely demise of the emperor's mother. Fate, however, had other plans, playing a cruel trick on Nero's scheme. Agrippina managed to survive the catastrophe, displaying incredible resilience. She swam to shore, where she was rescued by local fishermen, unwitting witnesses to her miraculous survival. News of her survival sent a clear message. She was alive and still posed a significant threat to her son. She now understood unequivocally that her own son desired her death, leaving no room for doubt. Nero, realizing that the charade of propriety was over, concluded that to be rid of his mother, he had to act with ruthless directness. On the night of 23rd March 59 AD, He ordered a detachment of praetorians, led by his former tutor Anicetus, to commit the irreparable act, to murder Agrippina. The soldiers stormed the empress's villa, where she was recuperating after the shipwreck. Agrippina showed neither surprise nor fear, as if she had foreseen the inevitable outcome. According to historical chronicles, she immediately understood that betrayal had triumphed. Before receiving the fatal blow, she uttered a phrase that would forever echo through history: "Strike here at the womb that bore Nero." The soldiers mercilessly dispatched her, inflicting fatal wounds. According to reports, her body was secretly cremated that same night to erase the traces of the atrocity. Nero, in turn, announced to the populace that his mother had died in an accident. Few believed this lie, but no one dared openly question or challenge the all-powerful emperor. His mother's murder did not bring Nero the longed-for peace. Instead, it heralded his tragic end. The emperor was plagued by nightmares, in which Agrippina's bloodied specter silently watched him, haunting his dreams. Wandering through the imperial chambers, he was convinced he heard her voice, as if the spirit of his murdered mother pursued him. Guilt intertwined with escalating paranoia, causing Nero to lose trust in senators, soldiers, and advisors. His behavior grew increasingly erratic, fueling rumors in Rome that Agrippina's son had inherited not only the imperial throne, but also her madness. Agrippina's death failed to erase her colossal influence. Her shadow loomed over Nero for many years. Many Romans remembered that it was she who had brought him to power, while others regarded her as a monster whose excessive ambition had corrupted even the most sacred bonds. The truth was that with her demise, Rome lost one of the most powerful and feared women in its history. Nero, freed from her domineering control, plunged into an era of rule marked by exorbitant excesses, cruelty, and debauchery that ultimately tarnished his name and led to the downfall of his entire dynasty. Thus ended the earthly journey of Julia Agrippina the Younger, a woman whose audacity defied established norms, whose manipulation of emperors reached unprecedented heights, and whose power seemed boundless. Her tragic demise at the hands of her own son was not merely an act of familial violence, but a sinister symbol of what transpires when insatiable ambition erases moral boundaries. The story of Julia Agrippina the Younger is not just a colorful episode from the imperial court, replete with intrigues and conspiracies. It is, rather, a poignant insight into how the thirst for power can destroy even the strongest and most sacred bonds. Daughter of Germanicus, sister of Caligula, wife of Claudius, and mother of Nero, in each of these roles she saw merely a stepping stone to a level of power unattainable for a woman of her era. Every connection, every tragedy, every opportunity was exploited by her to achieve this goal. Yet it was this very power, gained through cunning and cruelty, that became her undoing. The son she had elevated to the imperial throne transformed into her executioner, and this monstrous matricide, far from bringing liberation, foreshadowed his own downfall. Authoritative chroniclers, such as Tacitus, Suetonius, and Dio Cassius, are unanimous in their assessment. Never before had a woman penetrated so deeply into Roman politics. Never before had ambition trampled upon so many moral principles. Agrippina went down in history as an outstanding strategist, but also as the embodiment of the price one pays for unrestrained power. Her life serves as an eternal warning, When the pursuit of control eclipses all other values, the end is always the same: self-destruction. Rome feared her, Nero betrayed her, and history transformed her into one of the most sinister figures of the Roman Empire. And so the question arises, was Agrippina a cold-blooded psychopath, obsessed with a thirst for power, or was she a victim of a system that offered women no other path to survival in a cruel world?